Hello everybody. So today it's kind of a continuation of my previous video, which was I titled it Monsignor Bux versus Pope Francis. It was basically based on the interview he gave to an Italian reporter who published the reports about Archbishop Vigano as well recently. So that interview was published on the 17th of October 2018, which is the anniversary of the miracle of the sun in Fatima, which happened on 17th of October 1917. And this video is basically about the possibility of the abdication or resignation or renunciation of Pope Benedict XVI being invalid. I personally am not 100. I am just going to give you some of the research. I'm no theologian, I'm no pope, but it seems I'm tending to that opinion myself. But I'll give you the quote from the interview, which prompted this video of Monsignor Nicola Bux. And just to let you know, he's a very high-ranking official in the Vatican. He's worked for years and years over there. He's a professor of liturgy. He taught in Rome and Jerusalem. He was under Pope Benedict. He was a consultor to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and the Causes of Saints, and he's still a member of the consultor to the Congregation for the Causes of Saints in Rome. And I'm not sure if he still works for the Iglesia Dei Commission or not. I'm not 100% sure, but so he's still in Rome. He's living there. He's a high-ranking official, so he's no YouTube guy giving his own opinions. So anyways, so that's a part of the question he answered. First, he talks about how difficult it is to prove heresy against the Pope, and if he can prove it, who can remove him, and how can it be possible? There's many difficulties because of the rank of the Pope being immune from removal. One of the points is a declaration that a Pope has fallen into heresy, and by that, basically the Pope removes himself in a sense. But that's not the point of this video. The video, here's the questions. After he talks about the various difficulties, so you can review my previous video or read the article itself, which I linked to it in the previous video. So he says here, after all the difficulties involved in removing a heretical Pope, he says, perhaps, and I say this from a practical point of view, it would be easier to examine and study more accurately the question concerning the juridical validity of Pope Benedict XVI renunciation, i.e., whether it was full or partial, halfway, as someone has said, or doubtful, since the idea of a sort of collegiate papacy seems to me decidedly against the gospel dictate. Jesus did not say, in fact, tibi dabo claves, meaning I give you the keys, turning to Peter and Andrew, but he told only Peter. That's why I say that perhaps a thorough study of the renunciation could be more useful and profitable, as well as helping to overcome problems that today seem to be insurmountable to us. So that is the quote. So it basically says, you know what? There's basically just that shows his own doubt. He's no slouch. He's no idiot. He's a professor and working in the Vatican for years. He shows by just the mere fact of even mentioning it, that he wasn't even prompted to answer that, to bring this up. He brought it up by himself. To even bring it up shows that he probably has his own doubts about the validity of Benedict XVI's resignation. I'm just bringing it up. Don't know if it is true or not, but having two popes, two men dressed in white, it seems very weird, to say the least. Anyways, so I'll give you a study actually was published as soon as actually Benedict resigned, let's put it that way, abdicated. And I'll put the link to the full article. It is, I just printed it out here. I'm not sure if you can focus here or not. It is, it's entitled The Resignation of Benedict XVI Between History, Law, and Conscience. And that was printed in like pretty much as soon as he resigned. Even before the election of, again, Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio. That was written even before then. So it was not based on, oh yeah, look at what's happening. Let's try to find some reason for the renunciation. No, so it was written by a professor, Stefano Violi. He's a priest, Father Stefano Violi. And he is, I put my little notes here. He's a professor at law. He's a professor of law at the, so basically law, church law. So he's a professor of law at the Faculty of Theology of the Emilia-Romagna University in Lugano, Italy. So he's a professor of law at the theological school faculty of a university in Italy. So I'm gonna just take a few quotes. Actually, I wrote some of the quotes, so you can read the whole article yourself. But so here he quotes the renunciation, the words used by Benedict himself. He says, that's what Benedict said. And you can see that on the Vatican website. I might even put a link to it. So he says, Benedict saying, knowing well the gravity of this act, with full liberty, I declare and I renounce that's the important word here, ministry of the Bishop of Rome, successor of Peter. These are the words of Benedict. So how Father Stefano Viola reads it, so he says here, from a canonical point of view, the legal institution found first, so for a pope to resign, because in the first centuries of the church, even I'm just kind of quoting him, he says, first centuries of the church. And that goes for a bishop, any bishop, not just a pope. A pope as a bishop of Rome, as a bishop of bishops, a supreme pastor. So for any bishop, so as is known, so the first centuries of the church, an episcopal, so let alone a papal, resignation or deposition, deposition, tended to be equated with apostasy. So basically no bishop would be removed or could be removed other than apostasy. And even here it says Pope, and people are used to, a bishop resigns at 75 or 80, and 80 years old, they can't be a cardinal anymore, or have the power of electing a pope, or priests have to resign by the age of 75. All of these were introduced by Pope Paul VI, Pope Montini. He was an innovator. These are all innovations not in the history of the church. And he instituted them basically to get rid of the more conservative bishops and cardinals. But that will be on the next video regarding the Pope Emeritus, this title. But so bishops didn't resign because they got old or they didn't feel like doing it anymore. So usually it's because of apostasy, heresy. I mean, there are other reasons, but as a general, it wasn't like, okay, you're 75, bye-bye, out of here. No. So, and then Father here quotes, mentions that Pope Innocent III and he was Pope from 1198 to 1216. In a discourse, I'm going to just read that. It says, in a discourse on the consecration of the pontiff, invoking the topic of spiritual espousal, like spiritual marriage, between the supreme pontiff, which would be the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and the Church of Rome, declared the link indissoluble, like a marriage between a man and his wife, unless it be on account of death. Continuing the nuptial metaphor, he declared the divorce, meaning a pope resigning or leaving the papacy, illicit, be it accomplished voluntarily, so basically a renunciation, a renunciatio, that would be invalid, or induced involuntarily, depositio, so a pope being voluntarily leaving or being forced to leave by being deposed by cardinals or whoever. In both cases, this is illicit. The only exception being, the only admissible exception to be deposed would be in the case of heresy. That's the only exception. That's Pope Innocent III, 1198 to 1216. Now, going back here, so Professor Violi says, from the canonical point of view, that's the church law canon, from the canonical point of view, the legal institution found to be a legal institution for a pope to resign is found in its first normative formulation in the Liber Sextus promulgated by Pope Boniface VIII. So, and that same norm, to that norm is a referred canon 332, number 2 of the current Code of Canon Law, that one here, of 1983, which repeats with slight modification Canon 221 of the preceding code promulgated by Benedict XV in 1917. So all basically what Pope Boniface set the standard, Code of 1917 of Pius X, Benedict XV repeated it basically. Code of 1983 basically is based upon it as well. So that's the legal basis for a papal resignation. So basically Boniface says, yes, a pope can resign, but because he has the power to do so. So continuing here, it says, from the normative point of view, the discipline concerning papal resignation found its express codification in the norm Quoniam aliqui, inserted by Pope Boniface VIII in Book 1, Chapter 7 of the Liber Sextus. And Pope Boniface reigned from 1294 to 1303. So, and then I'm just repeating again. So he says, the norm will then be codified in Canon 221 of the Pian Benedictine Code of 1917, and without substantial changes in Canon 332, number 2 of the 1983 Code of Canon Law. In the comparison, so there's a bit of a comparison here between what Boniface said and the different codes. So in comparison with Quoniam aliqui of Boniface VIII and Canon 221 of 1917, which speaks of the resignation without further additions. So just the Pope can resign. Canon 332 specifies muneris, which is office, because in the previous Boniface and Code 221 simply says a pope can resign from the papacy. But the new code, which any pope currently is bound by, it specifically says from the papal office. So the word office, muneris, is added to the code. So what did I write here? Okay, so then Professor Violi, or is it? Yeah, Violi, Stefano Violi, and he's a law teaches law at the Faculty of Theology, so he's not an idiot either. So he says the innovative formula of resignation introduced by Benedict XVI. Now he will analyze the formula used by Pope Benedict XVI to resign. So, and as I said, I'm just taking quotes. If you want to read and delve into it more, I will put a link to the actual full, how many pages? It's like 10 pages, 10-page, very small print article. Here we go. So the two data emerge from the Declaratio, which is the declaration of Pope Benedict XVI. Two things happen. What? Number one, there's a lack of any reference to Canon 332 number 2, which actually this declares the resignation. Where is it here? 332. 331, 332. So it says the Roman pontiff acquires full and supreme power in the church when, together with episcopal consecration, he has been lawfully elected and has accepted the election. Accordingly, I'm reading number one. Number two, should it happen that the Roman pontiff resigns from his office, it is required for validity that the resignation be freely made and properly manifested, but it is not necessary that it be accepted by anyone. And that code, it doesn't mean like, oh no, I still believe you're Pope. No. It means that previously they thought they had to get the cardinal to accept his resignation. Otherwise, it would not be valid. That's what it means, which, if you go through the article, you will understand that. So first of all, Pope Benedict completely ignored the canon that regulates the resignation of a pope, of a pontiff. In a previous video, we talked about Canon 188, which invalidates all resignations if we're done out of fear, out of deceit, out of substantial error, which splitting the papacy would be a substantial error, and simony. But that's in the previous video. And so the two data which emerge from the Declaratio of Benedict XVI, according to Father Violi, lack of any reference to Canon 332 number 2, which is that's the canon for a resignation of a pope. Benedict ignores it completely. And number 2, the lexical choice, so the word choice, different from that norm of Quoniam alique of Boniface VIII, which speaks of resignation from the papacy. And then he puts the Latin words renunciare papatui, however you pronounce it. So first, Pope Benedict doesn't even mention the canon, which is, you can say, okay, according to Canon 332 number 2, I am hereby resigning the papal office. That would have been valid 100%, no question. He didn't do that. Number 2, he chose different words that doesn't really say even resigning from the papacy, which is the law of Boniface VIII, which was in the 1917 code as well. and from the wording of the code, which provides for, this is the new one, 1983 code, renunciatio muneri, renunciation of office. So Benedict didn't use renunciation of office, and he didn't say renunciation of the papacy either. So, Father Violi continues. The declaration, the Declaratio of Benedict XVI, in fact, affirms the renunciatio ministerio, renunciation of the ministry. And that's, it might seem like a nitpicking, but we're going to see later, it's really not nitpicking. According to even Benedict, the last audience, we'll get to it. So, because Benedict only renounced the ministry of the Bishop of Rome. And now, Father continues, seeing his own incapacity to administer the ministerium, the ministry, not seeing his own capacity, meaning speaking about Benedict, to administer the ministerium, not from the papacy, according to the dictate of according to the dictate of the norm of Boniface VIII, not from the Muneris office, according to the dictate of Canon 332, number 2 of the current Code of Canon Law, but from the ministerium, or as he will specify in his last audience, from the active ministry, from the active exercise of the ministry. From the active exercise of the ministry. So, continuing, it says here, the service of the church continues with the same love and the same dedication, although outside the exercise of power. So he continues, says, the object of the irrevocable resignation, in fact, is the executio muneris, execution of the office by speaking and acting, not the munus, the office entrusted to him once and forever. So what appears to be is Benedict resigned, abdicated, renounced the exercise of the power of the office, but not the actual office. He himself said, I'm just resigning the ministry, and in his explanation, he says the active exercise of the ministry. Which was, so Benedict XVI's so this is now, he continues actually quoting it, quotes the last audience on 27 February 2013 of Pope Benedict. He says, Pope Benedict is saying, here allow me to go back once again to April 19th, 2005. That's when he got elected, in his first audience, I believe. The real gravity of the decision was also due to the fact that from that moment in 2005, from that moment on, I was engaged always and forever. These are the words of Pope Benedict, by the Lord. Then he continues, the always is also forever. That's Benedict's continuing. There can no longer be a return to the private sphere. My decision to resign, keywords here, the active exercise of the ministry. So he's resigning the active exercise of the ministry, does not revoke this, which is being engaged always and forever. I do not return to private life. I no longer bear the power of office for the governance of the church, but in the service of prayer, I remain, so to speak, in the enclosure of St. Peter. So these are the words of Pope Benedict himself. So he specifically says, when I got engaged, when I was chosen, 2005, that was it. It was always and forever, and I can never return to private life. But what I'm revoking, what I'm renouncing, is the active exercise of the ministry. So I'm giving away the power to govern. So I no longer bear the power of office for the governance of the church. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, I renounce the papacy, I renounce the office of Pope. No, but that is what is required for a valid resignation, either under the 1917 code, under Pope Boniface's standard, which is just papacy. I renounce the papacy, period. Or in the code, which is in force, 1983, I renounce the office of the papacy, the papal office. None of that. He specifically says, I renounce the active ministry, active exercise of the ministry, and I no longer bear the actual power of governance because he gave it away. If he could, that's his intended desire. But I'm always and forever in the enclosure of St. Peter. Okay, so the conclusion of Professor Stefano Violi, that's what he says. So on February 11th, 2013, in full harmony, now here's the, I don't know how he cannot see what he just said, because everything, so here's the old quote. He says, on February 13th, 2013, in full harmony with the tradition of the Church, Benedict declared his renunciation of the Petrine office. Up to that point, the whole frickin' article, from history of popes and rules and canon law and what I've quoted here, Benedict, he just said the complete innovative wording and what's lacking in it. So he says here, Benedict, oh yeah, he followed the tradition of the Church, when in fact, the whole article is how Benedict did not follow the tradition of the Church. And notice his next words. So his to February 11, 2013, in full harmony. What did you say for like 8 other pages? With the tradition of the Church, Benedict XVI declared his renunciation of the, but again, Petrine ministry. And what is here? And then actually the same, he continues, concerning the dictate, it's not an option, it's a dictate of the canon, however, he declared his renunciation, notice the words, after all this whole research and pretending Benedict followed the tradition of the Church, his conclusion is, concerning the dictate of the canon, however, he declared his resignation not of the office, but of its administration. That's the conclusion. So the conclusion is, Benedict did not resign the office, which is required for resignation. Hey, I'm not resigning the office of the Pope, but I'm resigning the administration of the office. That's the conclusion. And the professor continues. He says, a renunciation limited, and that's an emphasis, the renunciation limited to the active exercise of the munus, the office. So he's resigning the active exercise of the office, constitutes the, and that's the quotes from the Fr Stefano Violi, the absolute novelty. So how can, of the resignation of Benedict XVI? So how can it be, in, as he just said like 2 sentences before, in full harmony with the tradition of the church? It's not, because he just said it is the absolute novelty of the resignation of Benedict XVI. And he continues, at the juridical base of his decision is not then Canon 233 number 2, which is the whole frickin' basis of a resignation of a pope. And there's the 188, which defines the resignations of ecclesiastics and when it is null and void. There are rules when it's null, even from error or coercion or fear or deceit. These would nullify the resignation. But so he's, as I said, he's at the juridical base. And remember, he's a lawyer, so he's not talking, and teaches at the faculty of theology. So he's not talking like some idiot on YouTube like me. No, he says at the juridical base of his decision, of Benedict's decision, is not then Canon 233 number 2, which is the basis of the whole resignation of a pope, which governs a renunciation of office, different than that pronounced by Benedict XVI. So basically, Benedict had no juridical basis for his resignation. Doesn't even follow Canon 332, number 2. So here he continues. Now he tries to justify this novelty. So he says, the theological juridical foundation is the plenitudo potestas, so the plenitude of power, sanctioned by Canon 331. Let me just double check on it. So 33 or 331, I'm pretty sure it's 331. Let's see here. 327. Yeah, so based on Canon 331, that the Pope, Bishop of Rome, has plenitude of power. Plenitudo potestas. Benedict, continuing what Father Violi says, Benedict has exercised the fullness of power by depriving himself of all the power inherent in his office, without, however, renouncing the munus, office, entrusted to him, which he did not intend to renounce. Do you hear that? So he's saying, well, because the Pope has a plenitude of power, so Benedict, that great thinker, he's too smart for himself sometimes. He said, you know what? I'm going to deprive myself of the power of the exercise of the office, but I'm not going to deprive myself of the office. It's like, I guess a president can say, you know what, I'm president, but you know what, I'm not resigning the presidency. I'm just going to give away I'm not going to exercise the powers of the presidency. Hey, I'll give my vice president the power. Or whoever you guys in Congress choose, or Parliament choose to exercise my power, but I'm not renouncing my presidency, but you guys can choose somebody else to exercise the powers of the presidency. That's basically what's happening here. So I'm going to quote Canon 331, and I do need some glasses because that's kind of, I'm just too proud to get some glasses. Where are we here? So Canon 330, just as the decree of the Lord, just as by the decree of the Lord St. Peter and the rest of the apostles form one college. So for a like reason, the Roman pontiff, the successor of Peter, and the bishops, the successors of the apostles, united together form as well one college. So Canon 331 about the Roman pontiff. See, the office, notice the words, the office, uniquely, cannot be split, cannot be divided between an active and a contemplative. So the office uniquely committed by the Lord to Peter, the first of the apostles, and to be transmitted to his successors, abides in the bishop of the Church of Rome. He is the head of the College of Bishops, the vicar of Christ, and the pastor of the universal church here on earth. Consequently, by virtue of his office, he has supreme, full, immediate, and universal ordinary power in the church, and he can always freely execute this power. So we see all the power comes from the office, and that power is unique. It's not shareable. It is specific. I'm just looking at Canon 332 here. So the Roman pontiff, he receives this power from the moment he accepts election to the supreme pontificate, so to the papacy. If he does not have the episcopal character, he has to be ordained. And as we said before, the canon which bases on the resignation says, should it happen that the Roman pontiff resigns from his office, it is required for validity that a resignation be freely made and properly manifested, but it is not necessary that it be accepted by anyone. So it's not a resignation from the ministry of the Bishop of Rome or of the exercise of the active ministry, but I'm always and forever in what the Lord chose me to do, and I'm in the enclosure of Peter. I'll continue to keep my papal name, my papal white, live in the Vatican, be called by my papal name, wear my papal ring, have my papal coat of arms, and still be called Pope, and adding the word emeritus, which we'll deal with in the next video. So that is what the code says. You have to renounce the office of Pope, of Bishop of Rome, not the active ministry or the ministry of the Bishop of Rome. No, the office itself. And there's no wiggle room here, because that is the law. And if you don't want to, or you have to at least say, I resign the papacy, which neither Benedict XVI did. I'm going to actually quote his personal secretary. I just want to go to Canon 188 here, just as a, so again, just I'm going to read it, but so a resignation which is made as a result of grave fear unjustly afflicted, or of deceit, or of substantial error, or of simony, is invalid by virtue of the law itself. So that's that. So now there's, I mentioned him in the previous video, there's Archbishop Gänswein. So he's a personal secretary of both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis. So, and he's been with Pope Benedict for years and years and years. Remember this article I was talking about, that how it was in 2013, even I believe before the election of Jorge Bergoglio. So, one last thing before I go into the interview with, which is a very, very, very important at this point, to even add a fuel to the fire, so to speak. But before I do that, again, at the conclusion, of course, after saying, oh, Pope Benedict followed in harmony with the traditional church, but actually he was a complete innovator, and he didn't use the words, he didn't invented the complete way of resigning the power without resigning the office. And then he, to justify this, his conclusion, basically, he says, basically, Pope Benedict, I'm not going to quote it word for word, but basically the idea is Pope Benedict is so amazing, so great. He is imitating Christ, who emptied himself and took the form of a servant. You can find the quote in the scriptures where it says, he's equal to God, but he took on the form of a servant, emptying himself. So Pope Benedict, emptied himself like the power of the papacy and took the form of, basically, he just gave up the power, and see how humble he is. But the point is, yes, Christ, the second person of the Trinity, took on the form of man, humanity. He hid his power, but in fact, he remained God. So if Father Violi's, that's the comparison he wants to take, which actually matches his point, which is like, yeah, Benedict renounced the power to exercise, but he never resigned the office. So that actually matches it perfectly. Benedict, yeah, he resigned the power, but he remains Pope. Because Christ remains God, even though he divested for his divine powers, but he remains God. So Benedict remains Pope. That is the conclusion. So now I want to actually go to the full, let's find it here, interview. I'm not going to, again, I'm going to put a link for it for you so you can read it yourself. But it was a interview. On an interview, it was actually Archbishop Gänswein was talking about a book written by a professor. Why is this not showing up here? There we go. It's loading, it's loading. Come on, load. I don't want to do this video again. So he's talking about a book written by a Professor Roberto Regoli, and he's actually another priest. It's called Beyond the Crisis of the Church, the Pontificate of Benedict XVI. So this Father Regoli, he's a professor of history at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, and that's one of the greatest universities in Rome. So he's a professor of history at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, director of the Department of the History of the Church. Again, not a loser on YouTube like myself. He's a professor at the Gregorian University. And here we go. This article is up for some. I hope I can see the whole thing now. And as I said, Archbishop Gänswein, he's the personal secretary of Benedict XVI and Francis. And he was talking about this book, which was, oh, come on, written by this priest. Just give me a second here. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to bring up the article again. Here, complete English text, Archbishop Georg Gänswein's and his speech. And if you search for it as the expanded Petrine ministry. So I'm just going to, should I just jump to the conclusion? No, I'll just go to page 1 of it, and then I'll just jump to the conclusion. let's go to page 1 here, because that speech caused further confirmation for those who doubted the resignation of Benedict XVI, because this guy isn't any guy. He's like and nobody denied what he said, and he's actually promoting this book. So here's Benedict's personal secretary stresses stresses there are not two popes, but an active member and a contemplative member. So let's actually the actual words of his. Actually, I'm just going to give you a little summary, which they have at the beginning. It says here, that's Archbishop Gänswein, or whatever, Archbishop Gänswein speaking this. This is why Benedict XVI has not given up either his name or the white cassock, Gänswein said. This is why the correct name by which to address him even today is Your Holiness. And this is why he has not retired to a secluded monastery, but within the Vatican, as if he had only taken a step to the side to make room for his successor and a new stage in the history of the papacy, which he, by that step, enriched with the power station of his prayer and compassion located in the Vatican gardens. So here's Archbishop Gänswein, who is speaking at the presentation of the new book by Father Roberto Regoli, entitled Beyond the Crisis of the Church, Pontificate of Benedict XVI. And of course, he talks about the struggles actually in the 2005 conclave, which the enemies of Benedict didn't want him to be elected, and the enemies of Ratzinger. So he talks about Benedict being a homo historicus, a man of history. Where's the exact quote? Exceptional pontificate. So he's talking about the book. Today we read this part of Regoli's intelligent analysis, almost like a breathtaking detective novel of not so long ago, whereas so he has nothing but good to say about this book by this professor, and I will just give you the link to the full article so you can read it yourself. But basically, and this was in 2016, May 30th, 2016. That was the date of the speech. Maybe I should just go to the third page. Black here, a lot of history. Oh, Vatican leaks. Okay. Here's a quote. The momentous resignation of the theologian Pope represents a step forward, primarily by the fact that on February 11th, 2013, speaking in Latin in front of the surprised cardinals, he introduced into the Catholic Church the new institution of Pope Emeritus. A new institution, and he can't invent a new institution in the divinely established order of the Church, stating with his strength that he was no longer sufficient to properly exercise the Petrine ministry, in quotes. The key word in that statement is munus Petrinum, translated as happens most of the time with Petrine ministry. And yet munus in Latin has a multiplicity of meanings. It can mean service, duty, guide, gift. he has left the papal throne, and yet, with the step made on February 11, 2013, he has not at all abandoned this ministry. Instead, he has complemented the personal office with a collegial and synodal dimension as a quasi-shared ministry. As though by this he wanted to reiterate once more the invitation contained in his the motto that he took then, Archbishop of Munich, and he then naturally maintained as Bishop of Rome, Cooperatos Veritatis, which means fellow workers in the truth. In fact, it is not in the singular, but the plural. So let's go to the third page. And as I said, this is Archbishop Gänswein. Still, you see him walking with Pope Francis everywhere. I'm using the word Pope because that's what he's referred to. This is the most important part of the whole thing. That's on the last page of the article. He says, and that's what the Archbishop Gänswein is saying. He says, since the election of his successor Francis on March 13, 2013, there are not therefore two popes, but de facto, and in fact, an expanded ministry with an active member, being Pope Francis, and a contemplative member, being Benedict. This is why Benedict XVI has not given up either his name or his white cassocks. That is why the correct name by which to address him even today is his Your Holiness. And this is also why he has not retired to a secluded monastery. So I quoted that at the beginning. And then it has, and he continues, he says, it was at least between quoting, at the least expected step in contemporary Catholicism, Rigoli writes, and yet a possibility which Cardinal Ratzinger had already pondered publicly, that's very important here, on August 10th, 1978 in Munich. By an act of extraordinary courage, he, Benedict, has instead renewed this office, even against the opinion of well and undoubtedly competent advisors, and with a final effort, he has strengthened it, the office, as I hope. Of course, only history oh, sorry, I'll go back again. He says, sorry, I'll read this part again. It was the least expected step in contemporary Catholicism, Rigoli writes, and yet a possibility which Cardinal Ratzinger had already pondered publicly in August 10th, 1978 in Munich. In a homily on the occasion of the death of Paul VI, 35 years later, he has, listen to this, that's like the money shot here, the money phrase says, and that's Archbishop Gänswein. Maybe quoting Rigoli, it doesn't specify. It says, 35 years later, he has not abandoned the office of Peter, something which would have been entirely impossible for him after his irrevocable acceptance of the office in April 2005. So as per the Code of Canon Law, he has not abandoned the office of Peter, means he has not abandoned the papacy, means he is still Pope. Period. What more do we need? And it's not coming from a YouTuber guy. That's what Archbishop Gänswein saying, quoting approvingly of Father Rigoli. So he says, okay, of course, in history we'll prove if this is good or not. In the year 2013, the famous theologian on the throne of Peter became history's first Pope Emeritus. Since then, his role, allow me to repeat it once again, is entirely different from that, for example, of Pope Celestine V. So his resignation has nothing to do with the same resignations of the previous popes, which actually returned to their regular names, went to a monastery, and never been heard of again. Who, after his resignation in 1294, would have liked to return to being a hermit, became instead a prisoner of his successor Boniface VIII, to whom today the Church we owe the establishment of the Jubilee years. To date, in fact, there has never been a step like that taken by Benedict XVI. So it is not surprising that it has been seen by some as revolutionary. So in this interview in his overview of the Pontificate Regoli, clearly lays this all out as never before. So that's the quote coming now, the quote from Father Regoli. It says, after he's a quote from Father Regoli, says, that brings tears to my eyes. His final words, thus this book once again throws a consoling gaze on the peaceful interruptibility and serenity of Benedict XVI at the helm of the Bark of Peter and the dramatic years of 2005-2013. Regoli himself now also takes part in the Munus Petri, of which I spoke. So anyways, that's it. So it is clear from even the words from Regoli and Archbishop Georg Gänswein, who is still the secretary of Pope Francis and the secretary of Pope Benedict, that Benedict never resigned the office because he took that office completely and irrevocably in 2005. So we will have to wait and see what happens. So there is big difficulties with the resignation of Benedict XVI. And what are the consequences? One can always say, okay, if one accepts that he is still Pope but gave his powers away, one can consider Pope Francis, Jorge Bergoglio, as almost a deputy Pope or auxiliary Bishop of Rome. So his appointments and so forth are valid. But that's to the next video when I discuss again the point of the Pope Emeritus title, which some traditionalist blogger says, yeah, it's okay, it's Italian professors when they leave, they keep that title. But we'll see next episode, next video. Okay, hope you enjoyed this video. And as I said, I'm just saying it and bringing the points out, because as you can tell, I'm no big fan of Pope Francis. Not just because I don't like the man, just because of what has happened and the weirdness of having two men dressed in white. Big questions on the resignation of Pope Benedict. All right, so I'll see you next time.